All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the latest episode of the Bitcoin Magazine Happy Hour. I'm your host, Colin Harper, and I'm with Michael, Cassie, and Brandon. New addition this week, we've got the Bit Piggy right here, the Bit Piggy swear jar. So anytime anyone curses or...
It was here last week, baby.
Oh, was it here last week? Okay,
Yeah.
well, I wasn't here last week because I was in Europe, so I didn't know that.
We
All right,
missed you.
so... Did you miss me?
Yeah, we
Oh,
missed
thanks,
you.
babe. But yeah, so we got the Bit Piggy swear jar again. So anytime anyone drops a curse word during the show, we're going to donate 100 sats to it. And, once we get to a certain amount of money, we're going to donate it to some charity. I mean, I would like to maybe give it to BTC Venezuela, but that's just me.
If you're the Sats guy, though, you have to donate 10,000 each time. So
yeah, Sats guy, unfortunately not on the show with us today. He's off camera. But all right, guys, let's pop them open. Let's get started.
I need a beer opener.
Yeah, can you hook me
bottle
up?
opener, for favor?
Hear this?
There you go.
Ooh, crisp.
What are we sipping on today, y'all?
You struggling?
I got this Black Abbey Rose
Cassie.
over here.
Oh,
Created,
God.
not
party
made.
foul.
Yeah, I just got back from Belgium, so I'm gonna sip on this, see how it compares to the actual Belgian beers.
Cheers, Colin.
Cheers, bud.
Cassie,
I
Brandon.
see what you
Oh,
mean.
yeah. Over the table,
Yeah,
cheers.
it's a pretty
Cheers.
shitty.
Clink.
bottle opener. All right, fam. All right, so we've got 3 topics this week. In this order, we are going to go over the updated academic study from Texas University that says that not only was a Bitcoin manipulated in 2017, but it was a single whale behind all of the manipulation.
Hold on. So
It was me, guys.
It was a Texas university, not a Texas academic, or was it both?
It's a
So
te-
it was
Texas academic.
It was a Texas academic in conjunction with an Ohio State academic. I'm pretty sure that it was like supposed to be. So it's through this publishing network, but I think
so
that's
coming
a good-
from a university, it was still coming.
It was-
From
it
Yeah,
was-
Griffin was a professor of finance at
Yeah.
UT Austin.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So it was
Yeah.
Texas
Sweet.
and Ohio State. Well, then you know the study was overrated. All right?
Right.
Oh,
Roll
Time to
Tide.
worry.
That's pretty good.
Ooh.
Roll
and
Tide.
then okay, calm down. And then for our second article, we're gonna go over one of our latest from one of our journalists, Jesse Wilms, called "Beyond China and North America: The Decentralization of Bitcoin Mining." And then we're gonna round out the show with a discussion of Tuur Demeester's recent article about the Bitcoin Reformation for Adamant Capital. So yeah, let's just go ahead and dive right into it, y'all. We're gonna start, like I said, with the was a lone whale really behind Bitcoin's 2017 bull run? Don't bet on it. And for those of you who don't know, you've probably seen the news. 2 academics, John Griffin from the University of Texas at Austin and Amin Shams, hope I'm pronouncing their names right, the University of Ohio State University, excuse me, published a academic report back in July of 2018 called "Is Bitcoin Really Untethered?" Basically making the accusation that unbacked tethers were used to fuel Bitcoin's 2017 rise. And in this updated academic article, they make the claim that a single entity was behind this alleged manipulation.
So one quick interjection on the title of it. Anytime you have an article that asks a question, the answer to that question is almost assuredly no. Like, when you title something asking a question, that's literally your way of trying to
Bait.
allege something without having enough evidence to actually prove it. And so you just, like, say, well, is it? I don't know. You decide. When, like, there's...
So you're basically just saying, like, when they're asking a loaded question, so it's not trustworthy from the start.
Well, it's like, Trump needs to be indicted on treason. You know, the name of the title or the article is Trump treasonous? You know, should he be indicted? Instead of like Trump should be indicted, because like one
Nobody
is a
wants to be
statement
wrong.
and one's a question that you can't really disprove necessarily. It's like from the get-go, it just seems like they don't have enough to even make the claim.
Well, yeah, and like it's basically what they say, and this is, I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty of everything the article says. I'm not going to really go over its entire methodology because it's very long. It's like 119 pages. Not all of that is the actual findings, but it's some of its methodology and data. But basically what they say is like you can see issuance of Tether preceding Bitcoin's price rises after the price declines a certain amount, which I think it doesn't take too much of it's not too much of a logical leap to say, well, perhaps Tether is being issued because people are buying Tether to buy the dip, which is basically I think the primary kind of counter argument to to the study's findings.
That I'd also add too that the New York Attorney General's office also said that $950 million worth of tether in the tether reserves were given to Bitfinex, right? So that was kind of like the undisclosed, right?
Right, and that's a lot of, there's some more background there too with the New York Attorney General's office investigation into Bitfinex following Crypto Capital's inability to redeem $850 million worth of customer deposits. Now, Crypto Capital was Bitfinex and Tether's basically de facto banking partner. That's a whole other story, but this is all wrapped up. There's a lot of shady stuff going on with Tether and Bitfinex, a lot of people would say. But, to say that their entire business propped up the Bitcoin bull market in 2017 is just, anyone...
Well, so,
Not enough evidence to substantiate that whatsoever.
Well, the entire business, did prop it up, but not in that way. It's like Tether was used to buy Bitcoin up, yes, and it was a good thing. It wasn't the way that they're the article is framing it. Right. So it was Tether that helped Bitcoin run.
Tether definitely helped, but also Tether, it's definitely a large player in the market, but I think it's still something like 50% of on ramps are still fiat for Bitcoin, whether it be euro, pound, dollar, or some other currency.
Interesting.
But that's any given trading day, right? I ran the numbers a while back, and it was anywhere from 50 to 40%.
Yeah. Here's my question: is if it was one dude manipulating the market this whole time, then why did it take 2 weeks to set up a Coinbase account? Because there were so many people setting up Coinbase accounts, right?
Yeah,
it's
right.
It was only one person, except for this entire swath of millions of people trying to buy Bitcoin in this one short period.
Yeah. I think his name is Alistair Milne. Or Milna, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but that was one of his arguments. Is Coinbase at the peak of the bull run was adding 100,000 people a day. That's crazy. And then Maddie Greenspan, who's an analyst at eToro, also said that during 2017 they were seeing an absurd number of signups on the daily. So
until they
hired
until they halted new user registration, because all the exchanges did that. I think
because they had to, because they were at capacity.
Yeah, they just couldn't keep up. It was crazy.
But no, it was one person. It was one person the whole time. I totally believe that. I mean, come on, guys.
But what's funny though is that it's not. I'm not countering this, but it's not those Coinbase people are the ones that use Tether to buy it. So it's kind of we're arguing something that isn't even part of that driving factor. This is the retail side that was just along for the ride, but
it's a parallel example of how unrealistic that seems, though.
And also just if you look at their methodology, they used on-chain data obviously to corroborate their findings. Well, not to corroborate, but to basically drive their findings. And I talked to Nick Carter about this, and again, this doesn't take a genius to point out, but they're using on-chain data, and obviously exchanges use one wallet or multiple wallet addresses for thousands of users, right? It's not every user has one wallet address associated to their account. They aggregate wallet addresses for individual users into, or deposit addresses for individual users into either a single address for let's say 100 users.
Does Coinbase reuse addresses?
Yeah. I mean, and if they don't, but you know what I'm saying? They don't have to use a static address to have multiple addresses aggregated for, you know what I mean? So, but they use on-chain data to say, look at all these inflows of Tether to this one address. Well, no shit, it's going to maybe God.
Guys.
Ding, ding, ding,
swear jars.
You almost followed that with a second customer.
But to finish your thought here, of course, if you see one big address that has a lot of Tether in it and is moving, when it changes, the market moves too. Yeah, it's probably a good, safe bet that address is an exchange that's got a whole bunch of different accounts linked to it, and it was probably even Bitfinex that owned the address,
right?
Because of course it was.
So in Nick's words, he says, "I think and I quote from the article. He says, I think the clustering and on-chain angle is quite weak. The fact that a significant amount of value flowed through a single on-chain account does not really mean much. There are plenty of omnibus accounts for exchanges and market makers which map a small cluster of addresses. There's nothing sinister in that." So, there's some flaws in methodology, and even without those flaws, I think one of the common arguments was someone who's making this claim obviously is not really a part of the Bitcoin industry and doesn't really know, was not around for the kind of mania in 2017, or really seeing all of the interest that we were getting from all segments of the population, right?
Yeah, and also, we're beating a dead horse here, but if you were manipulating the market, like as a single entity, would you really use one address to do it by? Like, you're not even going to try and mask the idea that you're manipulating the market. Like, if you're that smart to figure out how to print Tether in a way that's not going to affect the market and like all of this, but you forget to like, diversify what wallet address you're using, like, come on.
Someone that knew what they were doing probably doesn't use the same address in any given situation.
Yeah.
Right.
So speaking of, so going back to that idea that, people who usually make these claims are probably not from within the industry. I mean, you always see like, so Bloomberg and Wall Street Journal were the first to jump on this. And the mainstream media always seems to love to jump on these stories because they get clicks, and they sell ad revenue through these things. I think it's an interesting, I mean, us coming from like a Bitcoin media company is kind of an interesting exercise whenever a story like this comes out, because it feels like the mainstream media says one thing, and then, the next day or throughout the next week, media in the Bitcoin industry kind of picks up the pieces, and does cleanup and damage controls. Like, you guys really are not evaluating all the angles here.
Yeah, there's only one side of the story that's being shared there. Yeah, it was funny, too. I was listening to the Wall Street Journal podcast about this, like, Bitcoin comes untethered, I think is what it's called. But the very last, 30 seconds to 1 minute of the podcast, it's like, the Bitcoin junkies, they're really not affected by this at all. It's not going to change the way that they think about Bitcoin, but, it's, the average consumer, it's an emotional appeal to the average consumer, because then they go on to say, but, the people that this really hurts are the people who take money out of their own bank accounts and put it into Bitcoin. And I'm like, well, that's what everyone in the Bitcoin space is doing. So I don't really understand that argument. It doesn't really make a lot of sense.
Did they actually use the term Bitcoin junkies?
Yes, they literally said Bitcoin junkies. I was like, I think I'm slightly offended by that, but
triggered. Color me triggered.
I mean, let's not kid ourselves. Most mainstream media is treating Bitcoin as this is bad, it's stupid, it's wrong, and let's prove it. And, they're just going to keep swinging and missing. And Bitcoin, Honey Badger doesn't care. And this is just yet another instance of it.
Yeah. I think this was actually a quote on Tuur's report that he published, but it was something like the basis of fear is ignorance. But I think that's basically why they're publishing things in such a skewed point of view, is that they're scared of what sort of economic effects this might have, and also on the individual consumer level, how that might affect the user. So it's really just fear. But based on ignorance.
And on that fear, Colin over here, of course, had a great tweet a couple days ago, but it's almost like they have to buy into that FUD. They have to believe that. Otherwise, how could you still be against Bitcoin or think that it's not, I mean, it depends. I'm not sure if the person who wrote the article was a no-coin or if they're just totally against Bitcoin, or if they're just trying to point something out, but it buys into that whole play, which is
Well, yeah, this is what I've always wondered about, crypto journalists who aren't, into Bitcoin. I've always,
what's your motive?
What's wild to me, because it's you literally spend your entire day, all your days hating on a thing that you've known about for years. And Amy Castor is a perfect example of this. She's been reporting on Bitcoin since 2014 or 2015, and she says, I used to own Bitcoin, but I got tired of my money being so volatile. And it's if you had saved the Bitcoin that you bought in 2014 until now, you'd have more money.
You will eventually be tired of your money becoming worthless.
I think the other thing is in the same way that majority of journalists would discount Wikipedia as a source, I feel non-endemic journalists, at least to the Bitcoin space, really only look to institutional and widely recognized sources as legitimate, and those that are being published by these crypto funds or crypto research institutions, they don't give them the same amount of legitimacy that they would if they were published from something a non-endemic institution.
Which is actually hilarious, because they're spending their time citing a first of all, it was not peer reviewed. I mean, certainly, they had some people go over the study, but, in terms of, scientific peer review, the hard sciences go over, this paper was not peer-reviewed under that academic rigor, and was also published in a network called the Social Scientists, Social Sciences, let me see, where is it? The Social Sciences Research Network, which is basically a network for papers that can get traction and views before they actually get peer-reviewed and get actually published in an actual academic journal. But yet people are citing this as though it's some sort of truth. And it's incredible. It's the same kind of thing that I see sometimes in more leftist communities, where people will cite social science papers that are peer-reviewed as some sort of scientific fact. But it's not at all.
Definitely not. No.
Social science isn't science, period.
Yeah, it's soft science. But anyway... we've spent I think enough time on this topic. Lots been said about it. I'd recommend. Well, obviously,
Colin, talk to me about the decentralization of Bitcoin mining in China and North America.
Thanks, Michael. Good segue.
That was so smooth.
So
Smooth.
I will. So this was an article drummed up by Jessie Wilms, one of our contributing writers, and she basically wanted to look at mining
Love you,
operations
Jessie.
outside of China. Obviously, the majority of Bitcoin mining is centralized, and North America, where you have probably the second most in terms of like a continental concentration of mining. But I think this is not really exactly my realm of expertise. So I'm going to pass the rock over here to Bitcoin Cass and see what she has to say.
Expertise
about
is a strong word. I don't know that I would necessarily use that.
Don't you have a podcast about
The Havening.
I do, yeah. So I just started a podcast. The first episode is actually live on iTunes. It's called What's Happening. So one of the first interviewees
put
that I
it in
have
the
on my
description,
show
in the link.
is Eyal Avramovich. He's the CEO at Mindbest. But he actually has operations that are in Central Asia rather than in China, although he did look pretty heavily at building his facilities out in China, but it just didn't really make sense from his viewpoint for a number of different reasons. But no, it's really interesting. I think when you talk about decentralization and mining, there are a couple different areas of decentralization. The first being on the manufacturing level, and then the second being on like the physical location of these mining facilities, right? So we have seen a trend of like some of the manufacturing operations moving outside. You have What's Miner who's exploring Thailand just because of the tariff impact there, and then you have Bitmain who's moved their operations to Malaysia, I think. So that's the first level, but then you also look
Bitmain's
at
not in China at all anymore?
no, their manufacturing operation has been moved to Malaysia.
Does Malaysia have like a chip foundry there, or like a reason why they would move the manufacturing there?
I think just cheap cost of labor. But other than that, I think it was more of to get around the tariff laws, import laws in the States.
Gotcha.
Because that was having a huge impact on.
So this is like a kind of from the whole trade war then?
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Hey, we see a trade war thing in
Yeah.
Bitcoin. What do you know?
What do you know?
Yeah, that's so cool. It's trickling over to that.
Yeah, we're like a legit industry. When you said Central Asia too, is that like Stan countries?
Stan countries.
Cool.
Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan.
Is there good energy sources there at scale?
I think
Compared
it's
to,
more
like-
that there's cheap energy sources there. So like in China at large, I mean, it really depends on the season, right? Because so much of the power that's produced there is seasonal. So you have these hydro dams that only operate like half of the year. So we're just coming to an end for the Sichuan rainy season. So then a lot of these mining operations that are located in that area are actually going to be moved elsewhere, or they'll just go offline since the cost of power is going to go up. But like in the rainy season, you can see the cost of power as low as like 2.5 cents per kilowatt hour. So that's pretty low. Some of the
pretty cheap.
lowest in the world.
That's actually ridiculous that for half the year, because it's half the year, the electricity costs for basically the entire nation or country are like way higher because of the seasonal changes. That's so ridiculous.
Yeah, it's a super strange space. I mean, I think China gets a lot of slack for emissions, right? Like you hear about going to like Shanghai, really any major city in China, and like everyone is wearing masks. There's like horrible pollution, but the reality is that like China is leading the world in like renewables, like in renewable generation and in like adding additional capacity.
Well, yeah, but I wrote an article about this a while back. Like the reason why they're leading the world there is because they're building dams all the way up their rivers, and no one actually lives out there that's like using that power. So
No,
they're just
100%.
yeah, they're just putting it online and saying, look how much renewable energy we're making, and then like they don't actually use it. That's why the miners are moving there.
I've looked for like hours on trying to find like utilization rates of the dams, and you really like it's very difficult to find anything. I mean, I would assume that there at least 50% goes unutilized because that's usually the case at most hydro plants, and like.
But not anymore?
That's something that, like, if it didn't make sense for them to do because it is so capital intensive to create hydropower, it's like a 10-year project till you see an ROI. And, like, I don't think the Chinese government would allocate the resources in that way if it wasn't going to, at some point in the future, make sense for them.
Well, I think it came from some long time ago, like, while we were trying to move towards, greener energy, we put, like, a every country has to do 20% or X amount of like renewable energy.
Yeah, but they didn't have to sign that agreement if they didn't want to.
China,
Like
I
think it was a WTO
I find it a
thing,
little
like in order to be
far-fetched
World
that-
Trade Organization.
I find
they
it
had
a
to
little
sign
far-fetched that China would spend billions of dollars building hydro dams for cheaper energy and just be like, yeah, we're not going to.
Well, that's the other.
I mean,
you also
dude,
don't
they
get to
built-
really choose where rivers are. Like they just are where they are, right? So like even in the States, like if we wanted to have more hydropower, if it were in an unpopulated area where transmission costs would be and like efficiencies would be super low to transmit that energy across the entirety of the United States, we probably wouldn't build a dam there. But like the Sichuan region, there are millions of people that live there. I mean, like you said, in Chengdu alone, how many people are there? I think we had to fact check that a little
Well, it
bit.
depends on if you
7,
look
8
at the
million?
metropolitan area versus
All
the
right,
actual
we're,
city.
We're not going to get into this again, but.
But so yeah, I mean, kind of to the point of the article, right? Like, it's a good thing if mining is moving out of China.
Yes.
Like, the more centralized it is, the more of a central point of failure it is, right?
Well, the other thing too, so I want to reference an article that you wrote a while ago about how energy companies should be clamoring for Bitcoin energy markets, right? For Bitcoin mining energy markets. Governments should be clamoring to subsidize Bitcoin mining operations on their own soil.
Totally.
Because
Why?
Why? I mean, because if you're talking from a strategic standpoint from the United States, if Bitcoin ends up becoming, even if it's not a world reserve currency, but let's say even if it captures, the market cap that gold enjoys, are you going to want a burgeoning world superpower in China to control more than 50% of Bitcoin mining? From a geopolitical standpoint, absolutely not. You're going to want to have some of that at home as industry and GDP in your home country.
I completely agree with that, but I think right now countries are far more concerned with like the internal implications of Bitcoin mining on their country than they are like at the global like macroscopic level. So I think they're more looking at like how many jobs are going to be created if like there's a mining operation here, like how is it going to help other industries like in terms of like using maybe like flared gas at oil rigs. Like Canada is doing this. Like they have certain criteria by which they like judge those like companies that are wanting to come in and build these operations.
And also, they're talking about Steve Barber's upstream data. Yeah, he's got a few in Texas too. I think that's a really cool use case. For those of you who don't know, upstream data takes these mining rigs and it hooks it up to basically natural gas that is being vented or flared in oil drilling sites that otherwise would be wasted, and they're using it to power generators to mine Bitcoin.
There's actually a lot more companies out there that are doing that than we realize too.
Super cool.
And a lot of them are using like that excess heat generated to like power, like especially in Canada, like marijuana like groweries or dispensaries or grow operations.
Every chemical engineer should be a Bitcoin aficionado because Bitcoin is the ultimate efficiency plan for every single piece of lost efficiency you can get in a plant. I mean, it is, we got too much excess power in this one part of our plant, or we got, steam running through and like we just have to discard it out. Let's run it through one more turbine and mine some Bitcoin. Like, let's recoup some of this lost, power. So, shout out to all my chemical engineers out there, but you should love Bitcoin just like I do.
Yeah,
You
second that.
can't tell he majored in chemical engineering, in case that wasn't obvious.
At the University of Alabama, Roll Tide.
Not Roll Tide.
Uses his degree on a daily basis here at BTC.
And his spirit for Alabama football, of course.
Roll Tide.
All right.
Yeah, so
Going away from Alabama, is there any final thoughts on distributing Bitcoin mining? Anything that we haven't really hit on?
I don't know, maybe like just a couple parting thoughts. I was bullish that Bitmain now has an operation in Texas. I'm very intrigued by it, and I feel like I don't know enough about it, nor is there like enough information out there about it. But I mean, moving from China for them to the States, I think that's a big deal.
Yeah, but imagine though that Bitmain just becomes the primary player on U.S. soil, then it just is a Chinese mining conglomerate.
That's definitely
Are
not
they
a good
still
thing, but I
IPOing
also think
in
that like
the US?
that opens people's eyes to other geographic areas outside of China, and I think that is like the major benefit that we'll see from that from the mining industry.
Yeah,
at
I
large.
guess I'm just like I'm hesitant. I don't know. I would like to see Bitmain's kind of I don't know. I would just like to see their dominance in mining kind of shrink or contract rather than expand.
Well, yeah, they've got a monopoly pretty much at like every single like layer of the supply
Right,
chain.
and that's kind
so
of what
that's
I'm worried.
absolutely concerning.
So mining is fascinating. Your podcast we're going to put in the show notes for sure, so people can look at it. It'll be on Bitcoin Magazine's Twitter too. So that's really exciting because mining is so like not well known. But yeah,
Thanks, Tyberg.
no, yeah,
Keeping us on track.
I'm personally interested in it so much, so like it's a really big deal for me. It's like something that I feel like isn't really covered that much. So
Yeah, can you tease any other people that might be coming on the pod in the near future?
Yeah, so the second episode is going to be released next week, and that'll be between three of us, myself, John Quigley, who is the head of research at Miner Update. They recently hosted that event, the Global Mining Leaders Summit in Chengdu, China, which is where we met, and then Apolline Blandon, who's with the Cambridge Center of Alternative Finance.
Cool. Definitely got to check it out.
Yeah.
All right, guys, and moving on to our final topic of the day, Adamant Capital's recent report by Tuur Demeester called The Bitcoin Reformation. Interesting parallel that Tuur draws between Bitcoin's rise as a monetary revolution and the Protestant Reformation of the 16th century. I hope all of our listeners know what the Protestant Reformation was. If not, quick history lesson.
I have no idea what that is.
Are you serious?
Really?
Did you not have
Yeah.
a social
The
studies
Protestant
or history
Reformation?
class?
No,
Yeah,
I'm
Martin
gonna be honest.
Luther?
I don't give a shit
Not
about history.
MLK.
You ever heard
but
of
like-
95 Theses?
Yeah.
I mean,
Martin Luther,
I
he
clearly
went-
don't
We'll
know.
cut you some
So-
slack because you're Jewish, but
Yeah, I
okay.
mean,
That's
let's do
fair.
it.
So basically, Martin Luther
But
actually, I might be
Brandon's
eating my,
Jewish, and he
I might be
clearly
eating my
knows
words
this,
here.
so-
It was in Frankfurt, Germany, right?
Yeah.
Like it was in Frankfurt. Okay, so he basically went to a cathedral in Frankfurt, and he took what he called the 95 Theses, which was basically his
like a testament.
yeah, kind of like well, it was just sort of. It was basically saying like here are like
It was 95 things that the Catholic Church was doing wrong.
Yes,
Right?
and basically saying in a modern age back then, there's no reason for the Catholic Church to have basically a monopoly over information. And so, like, important context, like when you went to Mass back then, the Mass was actually in Latin. So it wasn't so that was what we call the Vulgate. It wasn't in the common vernacular of the people. So if you were going to a German service, it would be in Latin, and you're a fucking German peasant. You're a German peasant, so you don't actually know Latin. Like you barely, like you can't even read.
Got you.
So like you can't understand what's being said, and then also they were selling indulgences, which were basically just these relics.
Free tickets to
like,
heaven.
Right.
Yeah, which were like
Well, not
like,
free,
oh,
but
it's like let's say like your daughter died and you want to ease her time in purgatory.
Oh.
Then a priest comes by and is like, look at these are the bones of Jesus, and they were pig bones, and it says if you pray to these and touch these and give me 5 pence or something, then your daughter will have a few months fewer time in purgatory.
It sounds like shilling a shitcoin to me.
I was gonna say,
Buy my coin. These are the perks.
if you could drop your mic right there, that'd be
feel like-
amazing.
No, I feel like shitcoin is
fuck,
a
I need that
legitimized word,
Yeah,
and
sure.
that
Piggy.
That's for a good cause.
That's
Shit-
okay, but
shitcoin is
I'll do
actually
it
in
for
the
a good cause. But
Merriam-Webster
also,
dictionary,
that is
so-
an actual word, so I feel
It
like
was in the congressional
in Congress,
dialect.
yeah.
My quick addition to this conversation too is, if we want to really tell the story of Bitcoin, what caused the Protestant Reformation to succeed? It wasn't really nailing the 95 Theses to the wall of the church in Frankfurt. It was the printing press that allowed those critiques to be distributed widely.
Right.
It's not.
And that's what Tuur talks about in this report, and he basically says, obviously the analogy here is that the internet and modern computing is the printing press of the 21st century.
Yeah, but one step further though, and this is something that DB, our CEO, and I have talked about a lot, is it's not a coincidence that the printing press and the double entry accounting system were created almost within the same lifetime, right? You basically allowed the dissemination of information in like an entirely new and efficient way. And then almost right afterwards, you also allowed the checking of that information. The double entry accounting system basically allowed you to verify some of this information for the first time ever. And that's what opened up global trade. All this happened like almost within a lifetime, right? Like a crazy amount of turnaround. And so in the same way, internet has allowed this dissemination of information globally instantly. And within 20 years of that coming out, we have Bitcoin, this way of basically transacting globally instantly at the same time without needing trusted third parties.
So speaking of dissemination of information, I would like to disseminate the information that some of us would need a beer. Beer man, anyone can help us
Need a
out
beer.
really quick?
good.
I need one.
I probably don't need one,
But he wants one anyway,
you're
so
gonna get
if you can get 3 beer man, that would be clutch. Very clutch.
Cassie,
Give me.
I'm good.
Either give me one of these or give me a Corona.
Maybe take a seat. You know.
No.
No, fine.
Shout out to Beerman Graham.
Teaser
He's
for
our,
episode 3. Graham comes.
He
on
does
the
the
podcast.
Bitcoin Magazine podcast.
I mean,
He's
the Beer
also
Man.
our like camera and sound guy.
He's
for
actually
quality.
just the beer man. He actually has nothing else
All right.
to do here.
Back
besides
on
give us beer.
topic. Back on topic. So, Tuur, it's a 19-page long report. About 16 pages of it is actual content, and the rest of it is like kind of like the appendix with important dates and timelines for the Protestant Reformation. But we're gonna I want to boil down Tuur's like some of his like the tenets of his argument here really quickly. In the second section, or really the first section of it, and the first section is talking about his method and why he wanted to write it. But the second section that really gets into the meat of the article, he says there are 4 preconditions of a reformation. The one is the rent-seeking monopolistic service provider. In this analogy, or in this comparison, the Catholic Church for the Reformation. For Bitcoin, it's the international monetary and financial system. Number 2 is technological revolution, catalyst for change, what Brandon was just talking about, things like the printing press, a double-entry bookkeeping. He also talks about the hourglass and scientific research back in the 16th century. For our context in the 20th and 21st century, it's telecommunications, commoditization of computation and data storage, open source software, cryptography, and social media. 3 is the new economic class, people with something to fight for. The new merchant class, for his example of the Reformation. For Bitcoin, it is the millennial generation. Definitely other generations too, but millennials are big drivers of Bitcoin adoption. Cheers to that, guys. And number 4 is credible strategies for defense and escape. He's talking about.
Time out real quick. I'm about to dox Michael. I think Michael is technically a Gen Zer. He's not even a millennial.
Were you born in 95 or 96?
96, and I just learned last night. I didn't even tell you this last
Technically,
night.
you might be the.
It depends on like
Apparently,
which
yeah.
research you're reading.
Some people say it's as early as like 94 is Gen Z. So some people call me Gen Z, which I reject.
That's unfortunate that the line between Gen Z and millennial is
So
right there.
you know what the line
So
is?
Pew Research
you're
Center
welcome.
defines millennials born from 1981 to 1996.
All right. So
Hey,
here's what I think is the real line between millennials and Gen Z. Michael, do you regularly use TikTok?
I do often.
There you go.
Here's the other question: do you remember?
Also-
wait,
also,
do you remember Vine?
If you were 30 years
do.
old and you
Okay,
you lived
there
in
you
China,
go.
you would also answer yes to that question. So I don't really think, or if you were 40 years old in China.
All right, but like millennial in America versus Gen Z in America. Gen Zers are TikTokers.
Do you remember
Millennials-
where you were
Depends on-
during 9/11?
I remember.
Yes, but barely.
Okay. All right. Well, then I think
was
that
11.
was.
Michael's not that much younger than me.
You were
also.
11. I
He's
mean,
like
let's
3
fully
months
dox
you were
younger.
yourself.
five.
Michael, you were not 5 yet.
You were
You were 4
I
or
was
5.
6. I was 6. 2000. Yeah. Oh, just kidding. I
No,
was 5.
Cassie, we're both millennials or Gen Zers.
No,
Wait, are you
no,
96 too?
I'm also 96.
All right.
Oh, we have 2 Gen Zers on the podcast, guys.
All right.
I'm a
This-
millennial.
this-
youngins?
That's all I'm saying.
This is.
Don't tell me how I
We
identify.
are really going off script here.
For the sake of the argument, I definitely think that we're all in the same category with the internet and our relative age. And let's just blur the line a little and make this conversation.
I think
a little
I
bit
think you're a
easier.
millennial, bud.
I'm too
Thank you,
wise
thank you.
to be in the
Cheers,
same class as you.
nice.
No one asked.
Well,
All right. 4th, credible strategies for defense and escape. He talks about flooding, waterline and fortified villages and immigration for the religious wars that were spurred on by the Reformation. For 20th and 21st century, he talks about cryptography.
Yeah, I just like from a big overview, like on what this paper was about, and just like how cool papers like this are, especially from Adam and Tuur. He always publishes something that kind of it doesn't really dive into something that's too shocking or it grabs people's attention because it's so contrarian. But he really just kind of backs up claims that a lot of Bitcoiners make with awesome, like really good data. And so, like,
and for.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, and for this one too, like he does some really incredible research about the Reformation, also about So if I'm not mistaken, he's Belgian, I think. But he also goes into a lot of research about the Dutch during this period, and the Dutch during this period, they were basically a world superpower at this point. They had a lot of innovations in banking. He kind of talks about those here,
For sure.
and he kind of does goes to those to talk about. Certain parallels between how the new banking system of this era kind of took off and how he sees the new banking system in an era of Bitcoin taking off too. Like he talks about, he thinks this is kind of an era during the Reformation when lending, loans, things of that nature were kind of revolutionized. He sees something similar with Bitcoin. I think you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, he sees Bitcoin's killer use cases as being savings, underwriting, and lending. Yeah.
That was one of the things he outlined here. Yeah, and it's cool because so he dives into all that really nuanced stuff about history that we've seen happen before, and then he kind of basically comes out and the conclusions from this paper were really interesting because they support these claims that basically Bitcoin's going to take over these parts of the world where offshore banking has turned into a piggyback of a really sound monetary system, which is unsound in the mind of Bitcoiners, like the United States dollar, but offshore banking in that regard will turn into Bitcoin banking and stuff like that. Part of the paper, one of the conclusions that he said, I'm just pulling off the abstract to save some time, but that IEOs and those kind of things will be big too, and that's just a product of Bitcoin being so easy to crowdfund just so many different things, and it might not be on Bitcoin because it's IEOs, but just the entire concept is really fascinating.
I mean, if you want to zoom out,
let's zoom out, Brandon.
Think of how much change happened before printing press and double entry accounting and after printing press and double entry accounting.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, before you had kings, feudal society, most people were serfs or peasants. You had a few rulers that enjoyed food day to day, and everyone else was just barely making it. Afterwards, you had global exploration. You had cities forming. You had the Enlightenment era. You had the Renaissance even before that. I mean,
And like you said, though, is primarily due to the dissemination of that information because you were able to print stuff so quickly.
And the ability to fact check it. The ability to have, absolute truth shared around the world.
Distribution of and accessibility to that information that mobilizes populations that wouldn't have otherwise been mobilized. It's the same thing to liken to the internet.
So double entry accounting is what allowed for a stock. You had the first stock companies come out of shipping and exploration companies, basically going out saying, hey, I'm going to go sail to XYZ place. You want to invest in me and I'll give you some of the profits. You can't do that without double entry accounting.
Yeah, but hold on.
That
I want to
opened
take
the
a
door
step back,
to
though.
global exploration.
Just the fact-checking part, though. I don't know if that's
along with
necessarily true.
other advancements in navigation,
optics, all that kind of
stuff.
stuff. Yeah, sure.
I'm not sure if the fact-checking part was even a big part of it whatsoever because I'm sure today it's a big part because now we have this dissemination of information, such a long phrase, but that plus the fact-checking ability because we have the internet, for sure. But back then, I don't know if that was a big part of it. It was more the fact that someone who had a thought could print something at thousands of whatever.
It was the way that it
double entry accounting allowed for
fact-checking
to trade with Asia. So much global trade was able to be done by double entry accounting.
I think the important takeaway here is double entry accounting allowed for a revolution in how finance worked.
Yeah,
and what Tyberg is saying too. You guys are saying two different things. Yeah, the printing press revolutionized how we learn and how knowledge is disseminated.
Yeah, I think my interpretation of fact checking is a little wrong.
Yeah, no, for sure, and that's part of Tuur's thesis too. Another thing I want to hit on too that I think is really fascinating. That because I think a lot of the analogies are pretty sound. He talks about even going back to the idea of mantras. This idea that during the Reformation, you had things like sola fide, which translates to faith alone, and sola scriptura, which is by scripture alone. The idea that salvation is not something that the Catholic Church gives you, but is in the hands of the actual practitioner of the religion. And we have the same thing with not your keys, not your coins, and even virus and numerous, strength and numbers. I think that's fascinating, but it goes back to this idea that I think everyone here would agree with this. Bitcoin's a dogma. It's okay to it's a cult, but
sure,
a lot of people use that as a derisive thing and say cult is a pejorative word, no doubt, but when you really think about it, I think one of the things that Tuur really is hitting on here is that revolutions are not born from timid people. They're born from people with conviction. They're born from people who have a real stake in things and are willing to fight for something. And I think that's something that's pretty beautiful about this idea of Bitcoin as Reformation. A lot of Bitcoiners really do see what they're doing on a higher level. This is a religious fight for us. especially in an era where, I'm speaking for myself here, but religion doesn't carry the same weight as it might used to have.
Sure.
But,
I mean, here's the thing, right? Like, I still want to tap into this, like, zooming out. Printing press, double entry accounting, literally allowed the formation of, going from kings and serfs to countries. Like, countries united by a similar language, because that's kind of like
can you
where
explain how, like, just a little bit?
Yeah, because all of a sudden, you had the ability to disseminate information in a language, right? Like, there were limitations. You didn't have automatic translation. To everyone who is, like, your similar person, right? And so, like, you can kind of just start drawing circles around or lines around people who spoke the same language, like, maybe had the same ethnic background, and could start to unite around, like, forming economies with each other. It also came with the Magna Carta. It also came with all these other things. It came with the democratization of violence, the musket. All these kind of things all happened at the same time, right? Not the same time, but relatively the same time. All of these things are happening today. And, like, Bitcoin's kind of that final piece that hasn't really, is just now starting to come to fruition, where you can start thinking about us as forming the global economy, like, of the interconnected. Everyone can buy Bitcoin. Everyone is part of the Bitcoin economy. And, like, I can't even fathom what that could unlock in terms of creating this next financial system.
Sure.
It's not countries. It's the world united under the same financial system that is Bitcoin, that all you need is a node to confirm that this is a legitimate transaction that happened. You don't need to check and see if the gold is real or, if it's laced with nickel or whatever, like, there is so much trust minimization that happens with Bitcoin that this is the thing that, like, brings us to an unfathomable, like, civilization. I mean, it's what allows probably even for us to go live amongst the stars. If you want to
I don't think Bitcoin advances space exploration. I think Bitcoin fixes this fallacy.
It's definitely a tool for communication between, like, two different mediums that are far away from each other, because it has nothing to do with any, like, native kind of data. It's something that is universal. It's just simple math and numbers.
But tell me how Bitcoin fixes the problem of, number one, getting to Mars, number two, surviving gamma radiation.
It doesn't whatsoever. It's something that enhances it. So that's what I mean. It's like when we go to Mars, how are you gonna send U.S. dollars over the internet or over radio?
Arguing
No.
it's a piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, it's just a tool that it'll help. It'll only help.
How else would you create an economy on Mars?
Well, I'm worried about getting to Mars first before I'm worried about creating an
Okay,
I feel like we're
boomer.
getting ahead of ourselves there.
Anyway, but again, I mean, but back to Brandon's point, I mean, Bitcoin as a world reserve currency or as a decentralized global monetary system does at the very least, level the playing field for the little guy in a way that did not exist before.
If you think about it too, since, like, the invention of the printing press, when you have this, like, large scale accessibility to this information that you didn't have before, you also have to have this greater trust in the entity that is controlling your government, right? Like, you now have, like, another viewpoint, another perspective because of the information that you now have access to. You can form your own opinions versus just, like, what you're being told through the trickle down effect, like domino effect of that information spreading. And now you have, like, a much bigger picture of what's going on, not only in your own country, but also globally. So that trust, you have to have a lot more in order for whoever's in power to stay in power. And I think, like, with the invent of, like, even planes where we can go from, like, one continent to another, and even, like, the internet, you see, like, there's so much information that globally we have access to now that, like, that trust that we have to have in the, whatever, like, governmental authority we have in our own countries is massive.
Right,
and the financial system at large,
and
too.
it also, going to the internet, though, it also kind of, like, in a way, like, so it minimizes some trust, but it also aggravates it elsewhere, because now you have to, I mean, obviously you can fact check on the internet, but look at the advent of fake news, and look at the advent
fake news, and also of, like, censorship and...
Yeah.
Unite everyone under the same economic system and watch the violence amongst countries just diminish.
Hopefully, until
hash
they
rate
start
wars.
until they start invading each other to, like, destroy mining farms and things like that.
Well,
that
I mean,
wouldn't be-
why would you want to destroy
yeah.
mining farms? Because you're making your currency more susceptible to attack.
Yeah, it would be economically.
Or you're
not-
giving yourself the ability to have control more hash rate than
Yeah.
another.
You can't go to Mars
you guys are playing-
until you see yourself
Why?
as part
Why
of
are you
Earth.
going back to Mars? Like, what's why? I don't. What is it with Bitcoiners in Mars?
Not in
Because-
your lifetime.
Because it's,
Will
it's
there
the,
be a
the
civilization on
logical
Mars, so-
progression of
Say
life.
so.
It's
to go to Mars.
conquer the world and then live amongst the stars.
I'd prefer our little rock here where I can actually breathe
Like-
air.
Like this
For
is
now, at
I mean,
least.
this is clearly just a byproduct of like Bitcoin having so many freaking crazy possibilities. Besides just being able to send it to someone permissionlessly, and like this is just what it is. I mean,
Hot
like,
take: Bitcoin doesn't fix everything. And on that, I think we'll wrap up this podcast.
let's do it.
Thanks for listening, everybody. You can find me, Colin Harper, on Twitter at As I Lay Hodling, and you can find the rest of these guys.
I'm also on Twitter. It's just my last name.
Well, what's your last name,
Yeah,
bro?
come on.
Hyberg.
Also on Twitter at BitcoinCast.
And at Brandon_D_Green. I'll see you on the moon.
You mean
All right.
Mars?
Thanks for listening,
Cheers,
guys.
cheers, fam.
Tune in next
Cheers.
week for the next episode.
Stay
Cheers,
woke.
y'all.
Cheers. Roll Tide.
No, no, no. Roll Tide.